Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trout streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian. We've got Cody Kowitz on the line today, and Cody has been my guide personally on multiple occasions up at KTL, Katmai Trophy Lodge. And you've also talked to me about other guiding that you do in Michigan. So you're in a position in your career where you guided up in Alaska for 12 years. You've had started a family and decided, I'm going to stay home this year. I'm going to do more of my guiding year round in the Michigan area. That's Muskegon, so Southwest Michigan. You've got all kinds of stuff going on there, but one of your favorite things to do is to really target these migratory fish in both locations and streamer fish. Something that you've taught me quite a bit on, and I'm excited to share with the rest of the group. So just for a little bit of the background, you've been fly fishing since you were 12 or 13 years old. You've been guiding for 12 plus years up in Alaska. You've been guiding in and around Michigan all during that time as well. You're very handy in a boat. I've seen your boat skills, so I'm impressed by that, and we could certainly share on that. But I think the big thing for today is let's talk about your streamer migratory fish fishing with there, and then we're going to get into your tip, which is don't change your fly. Do something else, and you have a couple tips around that. So tell us a little bit about where you're at in Michigan right now. You said you work, there's a handful of you guys that work with an outfit, Festra Guide Service. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I work with Feenstra Guide Service in Michigan. Okay. And so we do primarily the Muskegon River, a couple other creeks nearby, but mostly just the Muskegon River system. And I've always done the Muskegon River. It's where I learned how to fly fish and steelhead and salmon and trout fish. And through my whole time in Alaska, when I came home in the fall, I always came back and guided for salmon and steelhead, and from fall, winter, spring, and then I go back up to Alaska. And then it's kind of a really cool setup chasing migratory big trout and salmon. You kind of would learn from one and take it to the other. And so every season I'd go back and forth. I'd learn a couple new tricks here, bring them back there, from Michigan to Alaska, back and forth. And growing up here, chasing 8 to 12 pound steelhead, all the gear I used in Michigan, I would just bring up to Alaska and chase 20 to 32 inch rainbows, So it was a pretty good correlation there where everything I learned kind of transferred over. And the same thing with all the different salmon we have in Alaska. They're a little different than the salmon we have in Michigan, but a lot of the tricks that I learned from one carried over to the other. And then streamer fishing has always been the thing that I loved the most. Just the aggressive takes, looking for those really nasty, angry fish really meant more to me than sitting on one fish all day and picking at it.
Yeah. When you say the fish are a little bit different, what do you notice that's the big difference between the two locations and the various migratory fish?
So the big thing... So the kings especially are so different in Michigan to Alaska. I learned a lot throwing big crankbaits and stuff in Michigan growing up, and spoons for kings, and how quickly they would shut down from being aggressive to not eating at all. And then in Alaska, going up there, it went from a 2-week season to a month-long season chasing aggressive kings. In Michigan, once they're chrome they start to get this bronzy color, they shut down, they get lockjaw really fast. You can still catch them in holes, and you'll hook them occasionally when you're nymphing for trout and stuff like that on egg patterns and stoneflies and leeches and stuff. But man, those fish in Alaska, I mean, you'll be fishing for trout with Dalai Lama stripping, and the kings
Mm-hmm.
will come up and chase it.
They don't
And
ever
fizzle
weaken
out.
from that attack
Yeah.
mode. It seems like, huh?
It's awesome. So that was one thing that I just really loved going into, and really just getting as much time as I could in Alaska, was chasing those migratory kings. And my first couple of years, I had to do what I had to do, and they're like, "Hey, we got a bunch of people. You got 4 guys in your boat. Go. You're gonna back troll, flatfish and spinners and stuff." And I was just like, "Dude, I got to figure out a program to throw streamers." And I just was like, "We're gonna put in the hours. We're gonna figure it out." And once you can show that it's possible, people are like, "Yeah, let's do it." And I just loved that. So I took my 2-week window for Michigan, what I would learn, and I was like, dude, I got a month of it in Alaska. So middle of June till the season closes in end of July, and you would get fresh pushes of fish even as the season closed.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd get red ones, you get more and more red ones in the end. So they would get a little bit more stale, but swinging big pink streamers or stripping stuff like pink rabbit leeches and whatnot. I just did an article last fall for Fish Alaska. It's on their website for my my stripping fly that I like to throw in Alaska for kings and silvers and stuff. But so I love doing that. I love throwing at those big kings, and it kind of reminded me of home, but how better it can be. It was like there's that glimpse you would get in Michigan that like there's a 2-week window, but really there's only like a handful of days where it's like on in there. And
whereas in Alaska, it's closer
like,
to that all the time, right?
Dude, it's like you have like your bite windows near tides, and it's weird having tides living in the Great Lakes if we don't have tides. So it's like, what do you mean? Like, I'm just going to go early in the morning when it's low light. And you have times in Alaska where it's like bright sunny, but the tide is 23 feet and it pushes thousands of fish in, and the river starts flowing backwards and all this crazy stuff's happening. And then all of a sudden you're just getting follows and rips every cast for 3 hours. And you're like, whoa, this is crazy.
Awesome.
It's really insane.
Do you notice a difference between the fish from Michigan to Alaska and like how hot they are or how strong and powerful they are?
So yeah, the fall fish in Michigan are extremely aggressive. They bite it and jump and cartwheel, but the window isn't as long. Again, it's like we get triple the length of a season in Alaska than we do in Michigan for that hot fish season. Well, you'll get the exceptional fish that does that and jumps and rolls and whatnot, but
is that because of the push of fish in Michigan is like one big surge, whereas in Alaska it's like multitudes?
We get trickles. What do you think that is? In Michigan too, but like we'll get like a big push in usually October, and then we'll get another, like if you have a big rain and the river surges, we'll get another big push in November, and then we'll get trickles in between. But it's mostly that water temp. Like it goes from like 75 to 38 in like a month and a half. Like it just goes, it drops. And when those fish come in and that water temp's 50 degrees, and they're awesome. They're angry. Yeah. They'll chase a streamer 20 feet just to check it out, eat it. On the way of eating it, they'll be in the air. Whereas like in Alaska, I mean, the salmon start spawning, pulls all those big fish into those gravel bars in like late August, so from late August through mid-October. So you got 2 months of just hot fish.
Yeah.
And that water temp's like 55 to 45 that whole time. So
right, it's like metabolic range. Yeah.
Premium. Yeah, they're as happy as can be. Sometimes when the water's too hot in Michigan, the fish will sit in funky spots and they do funky things. You can definitely tell like they're colder water fish, they like that 40 to 50 degree window. So they definitely act the way they're supposed to in that window for sure. And those Alaska fish are they're special, man.
Yeah. You talked to me earlier a little bit about some of the camaraderie you had at Katmai Trophy Lodge.
Yeah.
And how you guys worked together and uncovered a lot of these techniques that you've learned over the years. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys did that, and then also, some of the specifics you learned around how to jig for fish with streamers and how to do that? Yeah.
So there was like a lot of times where we would have the traditional setups, like the big thing in Alaska is like Dalai Lamas, right? So everyone has olive and white, black and olive Dalai Lamas in their box. Every client shows up with it. Every guide's got a box of them. And so the normal thing is you just take a 8-weight floating line and you cast a Dalai Lama out. And it works for the most part for a while. And then the fish start to get smart. And when I got up to Alaska, being 19, 20 years old, I got in there with another group. There's a few guys that were there the year before me. And then, a few guys came in the year after me. And it was awesome how every night we'd come back and we were all friends. Most of us are from the Midwest. We'd sit down around a table, playing cards, drinking whatever, stealing Pringles. And we'd sit there and go, man, I'm getting bites, but last week was so much better. What's going on? And we're like, well, let's try. Like, I think I'm going to try this tomorrow. Like, I'm going to throw a sink tip. You try putting a longer leader on, and then I'm going to do a split shot, or then you do this. And we would all we'd all have our ideas, and then we'd sit there and, we'd have scratch paper, like drawing out rigs, I'm going to do this. Like, well, the guy I have, I don't think he can cast super far. And then we would
put that extra weight on there.
Put that extra weight on there. We got to the point where we were tying flies with 1/4-ounce jig heads. And we're just like, all right, cast as far as you can. When it hits the bottom, give it a rip. And we were just like full on like jigging them with jig flies. And now you're starting to see like Montana Fly and stuff are selling flies with jig heads.
So funny. Yeah. They're making them.
But for us, a big part of it was, you can buy those sculpin helmets. Yeah. And they're beautiful. They look great. When you're using, like in Michigan, we get 10 cents out of a beer can, right? So we're turning cans to buy fly tying stuff. And we're like, man, I can't spend $8 on flies, on just the heads of these flies.
Just the head, right.
You go to the tackle shop, you could spend $3 for a 2 dozen
leads.
Yeah. So you're like, well, these weigh the same. It's all experimental at this point too, right? So you're like, I'm just trying stuff. So we're making all these crazy concoction flies, throwing them out there. And it was just like, I really attribute to a lot of the skills I have to that camaraderie growing up, especially those detrimental years of 19, 20, 22, 23, everything. Yeah. We would just sit there every night. You'd come back, good or bad. If you had a good day, you're like, dude, I figured something out. We're going to try this. I'm doing whatever you're doing. I'm running line, and I'm throwing a jig fly, or I'm doing 10 feet of T17 down to 2 feet of T14 down to 6 feet of leader. I'm going to try and roll over this or do that. And it was just like a lot of funky things we tried, a lot of weird stuff we were doing. But there was never any like secrets. It was always like, it was your brothers. And you didn't want anyone to fail. Like if you were the guy who caught 10 big ones one day, another boat caught one, you're like, dude, this is what I'm doing. Tomorrow you start at this spot. And if you see me wave you over, come on over. You can jump in below me. And it was always like, or like, hey, I tried fishing this from the inside. I tried fishing this one from the outside.
Right.
And it was a lot of just like that stuff. And it was just, there was no secrets, and it was just a lot of cool little tricks and nifty things we'd learn. And it wasn't always like groundbreaking stuff you can do all day.
Not like a ton of aha moments, right?
But it was just like, hey man, if you're having a rough day, keep this in your back pocket. Do this for a half an hour. Because throwing those jig flies, dude, you can only do it for so long. Like, it blows your shoulder out. Like, you're like, okay, like I can do this for
and 3 you guys spots. Are fishing big rods. It's not like you're fishing 5 weights.
We're throwing 9 weights with intermediate lines with a jig on there. Like, you're like, dude, just like, but it's like when the fish have been pounded by, like, there's guys throwing spoons at them. There's guys throwing X-Wraps at them with 6-pound fluorocarbon. Like, how are you supposed to compete with that other than getting as dirty as you can with like staying in your, like, well, I'm still fly fishing. I'm still gonna, I'm still doing what I can. And everyone has their own little line that they draw in the sand of this is cool and that's not. And that's some people don't like split shot underneath their indicators. They're gonna, some people don't like indicators because they're a bobber. It's like, hey, do what you want to do.
What about creating action? Do you really have a high propensity to, like, this is the activity that I'm going to do, but imparting action on your flies from a streamer side, is that really important to you? Where do you lie in that realm? Because some guys are like, I just want to dead drift, and some guys are like, no, I got to move water.
There's times when a dead drift is good, and that can do it. You get those really like stale like fish days, especially like maybe post rainstorm, like you get a barometric drop, and you're like, dude, these fish are not moving. So you're going to run, like on a spay fishing standpoint, we're like, all right, well, take the T14 off, put the T17 on, throw a tungsten beadhead fly, and you're going to lose flies those days. You're on the bottom, like tick, you're feeling rocks, you're feeling sand. But those fish are not getting up and chasing. Those fish are just sitting there and not moving. And then you get those days where it's like, you just got to like twitch. You got to keep it bumping. I'm a big, when we're stripping flies, I'm a big pause for the cause kind of guy, where it's like a lot of times people are just moving too quick and you're like, dude, you gotta give them a second. Because like stripping flies, if a fish sees a healthy bait fish swim by, I don't think they're going to risk it all the time. That's a lot of calories they're risking to burn to chase a bait fish down. Now, if you have like a pike, if you're pike fishing, you can move it as fast as you can past the log, and they're going to just smoke it. But also, dude, strip, pause, unweighted flies or lightly weighted flies where just kick, and it just holds and just slowly sinks.
It's like that turn.
The fly
right?
kind of like you'll see those, like the fish all the time that are a wounded 6-inch rainbow trout.
Trout,
like they dump them off the stalker truck sometimes, and they just kind of they're curled in a sea, just kind of. But they kick, they pause, and they kick and pause, and it's like those are the ones they're going to go after. That's a free meal. But like a healthy fish that's ripping that Mach 5 down the river, they're like, I'm not going to waste calories to chase that down. Just you want to make that. I'm a big strip pause. And that's for everything too. That the salmon in Alaska, you want to give them some action, but then give them a window. And a lot of times, like silvers and chums, they always hit it on the drop. Like you run a big weighted fly, and that thing starts to drop, they're on it, dude. They smoke it on the drop every time. So when you're gonna strip, and every time you go to strip, you got to be ready to turn that strip into a strip set and give it an extra pop. Because those fish, I mean, it's like you're hitting a cinder block, dude. It's like, poof, and it'll pull the rod out of your hand, but then it's gone. Like it's in their mouth, and you're running like a cone head fly or like a jig head fly or a cone head fly with a split shot on it, and you're not going to you have to pull that cone head out of the edge of their lip and slide that hook in there. So you got to strip, and they're like chums and silvers, dude. Silvers have that soft spot on their nose, but everything else is like bone.
Brick,
so you're burying in a bone. So like you got that strip pause, you let it just flutter and sink, and they hit it. They'll dig it out of the sand. Like they'll grab it out and then they'll just sit there. Though they don't like take off after they hit it. They hit it and they just hold it, and then you have to strip into them. And then they cook. After you hook into them, then they go crazy.
They go fire. Yeah. I remember you gave me a really good tip, and I was casting the streamer, and you had said, hey, Christian, before you get yourself in trouble, stick your hands out in front of you, just like salt water. And you said that. You're like, look, you're going to strip, but if you have your rod back at your waist, you're going to strip. You're not going to have any further to go to do your set.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you were like, only strip in, but then that way, if you have to set, you got another, foot and a half, 2 feet to go to do your strip set. And that was
exactly.
That was key. I remember being like, oh my gosh, you really got to rank on these guys.
And there's there's a couple little tweaks like that just like people are like, I don't know why I'm not getting a hook into them. And you're like, dude, that extra 18 inches will save you right now. Like that's what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you got, like you said, a sink line out there that has a fair amount of stretch in it, et cetera. And all those things start to add up,
Yeah.
right?
You got a lot of current. You got a big bow in your line.
Big
Like,
bow in your line,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah, very cool.
definitely.
Um, on the migratory side,
Mm-hmm.
do you like to fish differently in accordance to where you feel fish are going to lie? So let me maybe rephrase that. Is, on a migratory fish, I always think of fish are coming up the stream, but they're going to hit staging areas, and I might want to fish those areas differently than I would fish an area of standard trout. Like, oh yeah, look for the outside bend, look for this feeding, et cetera. So how do you kind of govern that?
So, Alaska's a huge one that sticks itself out a lot easier. It's a lot more out in the open. And that's inside bends. Inside bends are moving water, right? So just look at the current. If they're moving upstream, why are they going to be in the rushing water? They're going to sit, they're going to cruise up those inside bends. And when you're looking for those fresher, angrier fish, that's what you want. You want the ones that haven't been hooked yet, the ones that haven't been spooked by a bunch of boats yet, the ones that are still angry and still don't realize that their stomach doesn't work when you're talking salmon. So fishing inside bends and slack seams is that's go-to water. And it's the same thing for steelhead in the fall as well. People often, I don't think they connect the dots on it. We're like, well, this is a fall spot and that's a winter spot. And you're kind of like, well, why? And they're like, well, they have more energy in the fall. And it's like, or is it because they're just moving? Like they're inside those seams, the soft edge of the seam, like they always are, but they're not quite holding yet. And then the winter runs, it's just like after they've been there for a little while, they're going to sit in the deeper holes. They kind of find a safe spot, and they're going to stage until they get ready to spawn in the spring or something.
Yeah.
Same thing for kings.
Break that down a little bit, winter and fall. You did a little bit, but if you could break it down even further, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, in Michigan, if you talk to or West Coast too, any like steelhead guide, any big migratory trout guy, like we love those fresh fish, right? So when I always say fall fish, it's more fresher fish. They're fresh out of the lake or the ocean or wherever big body of water you're at. And they're angry. They're coming in. They still got I'm going to chase down a big ball of bait fish, shrimp, prawns mindset. And when they come in, they sit in different water. So for me, it's kind of that 55 to 40 degree water temp in Michigan that I'm like, ooh, we got fresh fish coming in. They're going to sit in these fall runs, a little bit shallower runs, a little bit faster. Maybe the seams aren't quite as obvious, the big, windy, stretchy stuff. And then as the winter gets there, as they've been there for a while, the water temp dips down a little bit more. They're going to kind of get cozy and they're going to move into a deeper hole. And you have to start fishing to them slower, maybe some deeper heads, deeper tips, maybe a little bit more weight on your fly. They're not quite as fun to fish those runs either, right? So, because like you get a fall run and you're casting down at a 45 and your fly line just kind of, it just skates across. It's down from you at a 45 and it's tight the whole time and it's moving and it's moving. And then it gets to the bottom and it's clear when it gets to the bottom of the swing. And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to let it sit for 2 seconds. Then I'm going to recast and take a step down. The winter runs, man, you're like, is my line moving still? Like, you're like waiting, you're falling asleep, finishing this run. And you're like, this is, I just want to cast again. It's been 70 seconds. Like, come on, man. And you're just dredging the bottom.
Right.
And then you know that that's where they're at. And then you finally get a bite and then it's game on. But those winter runs definitely are not as fun to fish. And then in the spring, they move in. The best fish I love in the spring is like you fish those deeper holes in the spring, then they get ready, they spawn, and then they drop back. We call them dropbacks in Michigan. Everyone has their own nicknames for them. But those post spawn fish, man, like they're a couple miles down from their spawning ground. They're starting to head back, and they're like, oh crap, I need to eat food again. Like, I'm hungry. Like,
here, give
oh
me my
crap.
feed bag again.
Like, I lost like 2 pounds in the last month. I need to eat. And they are crushing salmon fry off the bank. They're eating sculpins and gobies and baby trout. And those the dropbacks where we're at they sit everywhere. They have a lot of like runs where they will sit in, but you'll see them chase baitfish like onto the bank. Like they cruise up and eat some fry and then take off. And you're like, dude, this is crazy. So like springtime, they do sit in those winter holes still.
Yeah.
And then those post spawn fish are awesome.
They're a different mentality, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like their objective has completely changed, right?
Yeah.
So
they go back to like
onto the food and like survival versus like, oh, I have this purpose. I don't really care if I live or die. I just need to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing.
Exactly.
And I like how you say that spring where you're fishing a lot more buckets, right? The deeper waters, really breaking down a bucket versus the fall, you're fishing more of that faster moving water.
Yeah, the runs and
in the staging
like that,
areas and things. So cool to define that. When you talk about some of those other techniques, I want to get back to that. Like you talked about some jigging techniques. So describe jigging with a streamer, because not everybody understands that with a fly rod, right? It's different.
Yeah. Part of that came down to necessity so in Michigan, and I think this is true for most if you get a guide trip somewhere in the lower 48 that's not like remote, the guide will have the gear that you have, right? In Alaska, we come up with it all, and then we're kind of like, stuff breaks. We don't have the perfect stuff. So we tell every client pretty much, hey, if you have a 5-weight and an 8-weight floating line, bring them. So the jigging thing kind of came out of like, well, a 300 sink tip would be nice right now, but I have 2 guys with 8-weight floating lines. What do I need to do to get this down?
Yeah.
And it became like, well, I can put 3 split shot on here, or I can tie this cool sculpin fly with an 1/8 ounce jig head, and it'll get down. And it kind of comes from like, if you've done bass fishing, you've learned a little bit of it. But when you're stripping a streamer on a sink tip, you're doing the same motion, but the fly's coming up, and then when you pause, it flutters down. Like you're pulling it up in a straight line, and you're keeping it tight most of the time. When you're jigging it, you pull it up, and you kind of want to like give it a little to make sure it sinks all the way. Versus then you're kind of like surprised when the fish bites it on the drop. Versus the other way, you're keeping it tight as you're stripping,
right?
And there's a connection. But it kind of came out of like, what do we do in this situation? Make the best out of this. And it became like, we got to the point where it was like, this is doing better than that sink tip did. Like it's the action's just different. And maybe that's because sometimes everyone else is throwing a 250 grain or 300 grain in white sex dungeons or whatever it is. And you're like, dude, I'm going to throw something different. I'm going to get down,
and you hit it right too. Cause a lot of people don't think of that way. They think, oh, I got to get down. Well, I'm going to throw a jig. Well, I still got to get down. I'm going to leave it on my sink line. And it really works better with a float line, because
it does.
You're pulling up a shorter leader and a float line. You're actually pulling the fly up versus out towards
those
you.
Jig flies, I would never really throw them on a sink tip, because now you took all the action out, right? So it's just, you're dragging it along the bottom, which the fish they do eat stuff like that all the time. But when you have that floating line with a jig fly, you're adding so much action with it getting ripped up off the bottom 3 feet and then fluttering down, and ripped up off the bottom, fluttering down. And it's kind of the same thing like when you do a floating line or a floating fly on a sink tip, you're kind of adding that as well.
Right.
It's just and then kind of on the other side, like when you're doing I do a lot of like floating flies and intermediate lines, or with floating lines for smallmouth. And that's when we throw like the big jointed flies. You can throw like the game changers if you want, big rabbit bunnies. And then you're stripping, actually, you're going big strip, pause. And you're getting that big kick, that pause, and then that fly turns, and big kick. But you're adding side character to that fly versus the vertical character. And you want them to see it. You want them to entice them.
That's the same thing I've seen with like big poppers.
Mm-hmm,
I've seen guys throw a sink tip on a popper because they want that popper to dive.
Yeah,
like a diver instead of a popper.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a lot of commotion.
Like that swinging D. I don't know if you with the popper head backwards.
Yeah.
Where it dives and then the fly kind of comes up a little and then it dives. Yeah, throwing those on like an intermediate line or anything with that popper head backwards. It's the slider style and it comes back up and goes down, comes back up.
Yeah.
It's you got to add that extra little bit of characteristic, and a lot of it is if they're seeing that same motion from the last 10 boats they've seen the last couple of days, they're like, yeah, I've seen that.
Right.
You had that little bit of different sparkle to it, and they're like, ooh, that might not be fake. That might be real.
Yeah. We have had a guy on the show, and he ties a lot of deer hair, and he ties these they're like a mini stick bait.
Yeah.
Same way, fishes them with the intermediate and just
and
rips them, and they're just like, you know. Yeah, it's really cool.
I just hate the way deer hair messes up my house. Like, it's such a mess when you're tying deer hair. You got to tie it outside on a windless day.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been doing a lot of those with. I take the foam and I cut it in a little like noodles almost. You take your foam sheets.
Yeah.
And you cut them into 2 mil strips.
Yeah.
And then you tie that like deer hair, and it looks like deer hair, but it's just foam.
Yeah.
I've been throwing those a lot for smallmouth. I really like those. And
I'm a
really
big
good
fan
for
of wiggle bugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Let's see here. I think I got some here. Yeah. So here's one. You can see that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a wiggle bug.
Just like a gurgler. Yeah.
Gurgler style. This is more classic single hook, but this is craft foam.
Yeah, perfect.
The eye is actually right there.
Yeah.
And those things in Stillwater, man, these things, I love them.
Yeah.
On like an intermediate or sink line.
Yeah.
They just crush.
Yeah, those are great. And I'll throw those mini ones like that as a fry imitation in a couple inches of water. And it works. Yeah. It's really cool. Those browns and rainbows will come up in shallow water and they'll crush bait. You'll see if you start looking early spring. So in Alaska it's the month of June. In Michigan it's April when we get our salmon migration, and people think it's dry flies. They're like, man, what are these fish eating? They're eating something. They're eating fry. They're busting fry off the surface, and you'll start to see them come up into 2 inches of water, and
they chase them all in and just
People often, they see rising like that, and they're like, oh, we should put a caddis on, and you're like, oh, they're not eating caddis. They're eating fry, man. They're
smashing bait, man.
Eating protein, yeah.
They're taking notes from their redfish buddies.
Yeah. It's cool stuff.
You talked about a tip, and your tip was correlated around not changing flies.
Yeah.
Because a lot of trout anglers get into that mentality of it's the fly, it's the fly. And sometimes that can be true, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be a hatch, etc.
Yeah.
But
definitely if you're hatch fishing, or if you're in clear water and you're on a high bank and you look down and you're like, dude, there's a big brown down there. I got to figure out what he's going to eat.
Yeah.
That's the hunt to figure out what that fish is going to eat. Or if you're on a hatch.
Trigger on, right?
Yeah, yep. And you're going to go through your box of Copper Johns and your Frenchies and all that stuff.
Yeah, sow bugs, etc.
Yeah, exactly. The check nymph guys go nuts for that stuff. But me, I'm like, dude, that fish didn't want it. Let's keep moving. And
I want to digress because we're talking streamers.
Yeah, we're talking streamers now. Yeah. So for me, don't change flies, change fish, right? So if we're fishing any of the fish, right? So if we're fishing steelhead, any of the Pacific salmon, brown trout, smallmouth, pike, whatever it is. You throw a fly in a rig that you have confidence in. That's a huge thing. So it's not just like throw a random fly and call it good. Like if we're spay fishing for steelhead or big rainbows, we're like, okay, so the water is this high, or it's this flow, it's fall. I'm gonna throw a black and copper leech. I know it's gonna work. You're gonna do that to the best you can, fish the best way you can, but don't worry about always like, oh, I fished the black and copper through this run, I'm going to fish olive through the next run, or I'm going to fish pink through the run after that, or I'm going to do this. It's like, unless the sun goes away or it starts downpouring or the river blows out when you're fishing it or something catastrophic happens, like I'm not worrying about it. I'm like, dude, I got a fly I like. It's kind of nice when I have two anglers because I'm like, all right, I can throw one of these and one of those. Throw
one
a big
starts
and small.
catching on, and then
yeah, you're like, okay, well, this fly's a little bit bigger, this fly's a little bit smaller, but for the most part, I'm like, I got a sculpin and I got a leech, and I'm gonna cover water, and that's the name of the game. Because you could sit and run through the same run, you're like, I know there's fish in here, I know there's fish in here, I'm gonna change my fly and keep going, but it's like, dude, I know that there's a fish somewhere in the system that's gonna take this big fly, and I want a big mean fish, because the more times you fish through a run, you're gonna put them down a little bit. And also, the more time you're wasting re-rigging, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go through my fly box again. And it's like, dude, you could have made
five casts.
Five casts. Yeah, it's like, that means more. Because I guarantee the only thing that really matters is having a hook in the water. Like, if you're sitting in the boat, that's the only time there's a 0% chance you're going to catch a fish. Like, if you're in the water, that matters the most. So if, along the course of the day, if you're changing flies every 2 runs, I mean, that's 2 extra runs, 3 extra runs you could have fished in the day. Like, that matters more. Covering water, like,
you know, you want to be in the right water, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about covering water. That doesn't mean just going up or downstream.
Yeah, that doesn't mean just
was I covering deep enough?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and that's something where, like, you know, you don't want to be in no man's land. You're going to cover as many good runs as you can during the day. As many, like, if it's in the fall, I know those fish they're just moving, right? They're just moving through. So, like, if you saw a fish in a run and you turned back around and fished it, that fish probably kept going. So it's like, no, I'm going to fish this through. If I saw a fish as I was fishing, turning around and we're trying to refish through that with purple or some other color. Now, if you're fishing through and you're like, I don't know if I'm getting down deep enough, maybe throwing like a beadhead fly on or something, lead eyes on. Or if you're dredging bottom all the time, like, okay, I'm going to go from lead eyes to beadhead to unweighted, something like that. But my big thing is, man, as long as I know that I'm fishing it right, and I'm like, I know I'm good. We're making swings, we're making drifts, we're doing good. I'm not going to stop and change my flies every 20 minutes. But still check your hooks and stuff. Like, still do that basic thing. But, like, yeah, I'm not worried about changing too much.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I think the other one that's really nice to think about is, you know, we talked about covering water. Like, I'm the proponent of, if I go a little bit heavier, it's easier for me to adjust my water height. I can strip faster to keep my fly up higher. I can raise my tip to keep my fly up higher. I can not put as much line out to keep my fly up higher.
It's easier. Well, so when you're tapping bottom too, you at least know that you're down. So it's easier to, like, you want to go down and then bring yourself back up a little bit versus be like, I think I'm getting down. And then you're just throwing out there and you're like, how long of a sink tip do you have on there? Maybe we should put a little bit bigger one on. Maybe we should put a little bit more.
That's a great example.
You know,
like, I see all the time, like, stick your rod tip way underwater. And I'm like, well, if I'm having to stick my rod tip way underwater, I probably should just be on a heavier sink line. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
And, I mean, I think that's a great tip. Have your tip in the water, but, like, I've fished with guys who are like, no, really stick it down there. You're like,
Yeah,
no,
I'm not sure.
I don't want to put my $800 rod or whatever it is in the water, rip it off. I want to fish a heavier line, so I'm in the right zone, and I'm not having to fight my rod and my equipment all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I think have like when we're stripping, rod down low, and with your hands out front, that's a big thing to give you more space. Because if you're starting at flat out, you have nowhere to go. Like you've already used half of your wingspan, right? It's like you can't pull it up any further. I think having your rod down low, that's just more giving yourself more of you have more
better
running
positioning.
space.
Yeah, better positioning. Yeah. I mean, that's the guy who's dry fly fishing, right? And he's holding his rod like this while he's the beginner, right? He's holding it up, and you're going, no,
where are you going to go?
Put your rod out, because if you go to set, you're like 2 inches and you're in the bill of your hat,
Yeah, exactly.
So great example. Well, Cody, hey man, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
dude.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you again and hear your voice. And you've always been an awesome guide for me. So guys, if you want to get a hold of Cody, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you to go maybe on a trip with you?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is actually through Instagram. That's probably I'm on that the most. And that's going to be Freshwater West Coast on Instagram.
Okay, Freshwater West Coast.
Yeah.
And what's the guide service website? Do you know?
So Feenstra Guide Service is let me double check. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Yep. Feenstra Outdoors is the guide service that I work with in Michigan. So that's what I work for in Michigan.
Excellent. Well, you guys know how to get a hold of Cody. Give him a call. And if you can't get a hold of him, just ring me. I'll make sure you get a hold of him. We go back a little ways and have had some fun. So appreciate you being on the show again, Cody. Thanks again for teaching us so much. And we'll see you guys next time. Thanks. Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trail streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species.